What's going on, guys? It's Fear Turbo here. Today we're going to talk about the ThunderKnight build for the Stamina Sorcerer in the Morrowind patch. I updated this build for the Homestead, and I'm going to update this build for the Morrowind patch. This is my most played currently, my most played tune and spec and class, which would be Stamina Sorcerer. So the DPS might be a little higher because I'm more familiar with it, and other classes might be a little bit lower just because I'm not as familiar with it. It does take time to master it, even though the techniques are quite the same. There's little bitty things about each class and their passes to where you need to master them. But for the Stamina Sorcerer, this is my guy, right? Black Goku right here. Let's jump right into the gear. So we're using exactly the same setup as last patch. The only difference is there's a little tweak in champion points, and that's really going to boost our damage in terms of what we really need to focus on, which is going to be a lot of dots. So let's get right into it. Jack of the Two-Fanged Snake. Now, you've seen this set a lot, probably last patch, this patch. If you follow the ThunderKnight build, you've seen this before. It's extremely strong. It's 5k penetration. It's got 2, 3, 4 pieces, everything you want. Extremely strong here. We're going to do it 5 body, divines, all stam, okay? Our 2-piece is going to be Krog. Now, the reason for this is because 1, it's physical damage, 2, it's a damage over time effect, and 3, it has a massive 1 item, right? You're going to want both divines, both medium. I currently don't have one, so I got to get to doing those pledges, but you're going to want both divines, both medium, all stam on it. The reason why we go Krag is because we have 5% physical damage in our passive, so that's going to apply to this. Also, our Thaumaturge CP is going to apply to this, and it's going to constantly hit the boss. Not to mention, it gives us 1,935 pin when both the pieces are golded, and that allows us to take off one of our sharpened weapons and put precise. So we gain 3.5% critical while using the Krog helmet, because we're going to have 5k here, 2.5 here, and 1,900 here. So that's going to round us out to really good penetration before we get major fracture, minor fracture, crusher, outcosh, and we're going to be hitting the boss for basically almost true damage. He's not going to have any armor, and the uptime on everything is going to be good, and this is a good area to be in. For the rings, we're going to go 3 Vicious Ophidian. You can also do 3 Alkosh, or you can do 3 War Machine. I think War Machine has a stam morph. I think War Machine has a stamina 1 piece. Yeah, okay, so this has a stamina 1 piece. So we have an option here as well, because Alkosh, I believe, is the same as, yeah, they both, so VO and Alkosh both have crit, and then War Machine has stamina. So we have an option there. I have a full set of this, and I could probably take a look at it, but I think the crit is more important on stamina builds. Everything's about crit. We have a whole bunch of it, and it's really juicy. Now, the reason why we're not using an axe is because, again, we're using penetration, and axes go through armor. That's what they do. They're bleeds. An axe procs a bleed, rending slashes procs a bleed, and that goes through armor. Also, another tip, it goes through block. So in PvP, it goes through block and armor. So it doesn't have anything to do with armor, and it just straight up does damage. Now, because we're using pin in our kit, and we have the boss down to like no armor at all, the bleed is not going to be doing as much as before, previously, 2 patches ago, when we had Twiceborn Star on, and we didn't have a whole lot of penetration, and all we used was, we had 1 axe on our thing, we had rending slashes, and the crit hit damage, and always critting was popping those big 19k bleed ticks. We don't have that anymore, so we're going to go with the double daggers here. You're going to want 1 precise, 1 sharpened, and then you're going to want a back bar Maelstrom sharpened bow. Now, sharpened, why sharpened? Okay, so on our back bar, we have 2 ground dots that are very important. We have Endless Hell, and we have Caltrops. Ground dots take the trait of your impact bar. So when I throw caltrops and when I shoot endless hail, they're going to take the sharpen trait. And then when I swap over, they're going to use the crit chance and the crit hit damage on this bar. So we don't want to lose. If we used a precise bar, we'd basically be losing 2,580 pen. And we don't want to do that because both of our top damage skills will be Endless Hail and Razor Caltrops. They're going to be a big part of our damage, and we don't want them to lose out on any penetration. And overpinning is fine on those because, to be honest, we just want to make sure that they're capped at pen at all times. So say there's a downtime on Alkosh, Crusher, and maybe a healer's down, right? A healer's down and there's no minor fracture. You just have this area of opportunity to where all that damage will be gone. Obviously to all your skills, but your big damage contributors, you want to have sharp. Promise. I've had the best results with this on the back bar. So that's kind of the gear here. Same thing as last patch. I know it's the same stuff, but man, it's super effective. I'm telling you. Last patch, I was actually quite proud. We hit 51k single target on the Stamina Sorcerer. Obviously, the boss fight was extremely easy, and he has a shield phase, so you can't crit him, which is even more impressive because you lose a lot of damage there. So, and stamina is all about critting. So, yep, the gear is pretty much the same. Your jewelry here, like I said, War Machine, Alkosh, Vicious Ophidian, probably doesn't make too much of a swing difference. So whatever you have. For those that are going to ask in the comment section, you know, what if I don't have Two Fang? What if I don't have Vicious Ophidian? So a good alternative to that would be Spriggans. Spriggans for Two Fang Snake. You're basically just going to lose out on 1k pin. You're going to have some more stam, which isn't bad on a stam sorcerer because we have, you know, if you're a red guard plus you have bound armaments on, that's a big boost to stam pool, and the 4-piece is weapon damage, which is really good. Agility is another good substitute for the jewelry. It's pretty much your only option here because there's really no other good jewelry unless you wanted to swap some like Spriggan's jewelry in there and really get creative. But yeah, this is pretty much your go-to. It gives you another massive pool of stamina. So if you went the Spriggan's agility route, you would have a lot of stamina. So that might help you on the sustain end too as well, if you're just getting into Stam Sorcerer. So I just wanted to throw that out. I know a lot of you, this is a guide for the kind of like the top 10%, the guys that are going for the scores and stuff like that. But everyone starts somewhere, and those are fairly easy to get because you can buy agility because it comes from, you know, random dungeon finders, Imperial cities, stuff like that. And the Spriggans comes from the zone. So Bankrai, you can find Spriggans from the world bosses in the zone. You can buy it with AP from the zone bags in Cyrodiil, and you can buy them on the vendors that people have already got them and they want to sell them. So just be on the lookout for those things. Also, another thing to note is if you wanted to go Spriggan jewelry and Spriggan weapons, or Spriggan jewelry and 2 armor pieces divines, you can go Night Mother's Gaze right here. You could do 3 armor, 2 weapons, or you can go Hunting's Rage. If you go these route, I do suggest 2 sharpened weapons. And if you don't have a monster helm, then just craft. Go ahead and craft you some crafted gear there, the ones I suggested. So guys, that's the gear, pretty much the same, I know, as always, but it's super, super good. Another thing to note is I will be testing if War Machine jewelry 3-piece and then, you know, a helmet and shoulder would be better, not for yourself, but basically for the group. So what you would do is you would just keep Maelstrom weapons and you would just replace the jewelry with War Machine and do a helmet and shoulder of War Machine as well. Because Sorts have a low cost ultimates, we'll still be using Rend instead of Dawnbreaker because Rend is going to be a massive amount of damage and a part of your survivability because it heals you. But 128 ult isn't a lot of, you know, a big cost, and we get it up pretty easily. So, you know, maybe War Machine will be better in terms of whole group DPS instead of having the Krog. Also, if the boss is moving around, you know, the Krog 2-piece might not be the best thing for you, and just having that extra Major Slayer damage for when you ult will be very, very good. Although Ren does last a long time, so it won't get the full buff from the Major Slayer because Major Slayer only lasts 10 seconds, I believe. No, we don't want to do that. Pretty sure it's 10 seconds. Yeah, it's 10 seconds. But 15% extra damage on your Ren, man, that's going to sound really juicy. So I'll have to test that out, and I'll keep it updated on my website at fearturbo.com, so make sure you check that out. Yes, so that's the gear, guys. We'll go ahead and head over to the skills and passives and take a look at those and how they boost up the Stamina Sorcerer and kind of how the Stamina Sorcerer works in terms of, you know, compared to other stamina classes and why you might choose this one. Alright guys, now we're going to talk about the skills and passives and kind of how they work together with each other. So let's just start off with our front bar here. We have Hurricane, which is this is like a super big skill. It has a lot in it. Okay, it has a massive AoE damage dot over time. That is physical damage, which is also very important. Also, one thing to note is that the last tick will do 150% more damage. Another thing to note is that this skill that's a massive AoE and decent single target damage also gives you your major resolve, major ward, and a little bit of speed in the mix there. So you're going to get your major defense buffs along with a nice AoE dot that also can proc implosion, which is this is a big contributor to our damage. It's one of the reasons why I love Stam Sword so much. Is when you deal physical damage, that's why this is important. You have a 6% chance to instantly pulverize enemies under 15% health. So this is AoE, right? And so it can proc multiple implosions on different targets in trash and on boss fights, on adds that they may have, or a mini boss, so forth. And so this is really, really, really awesome here. Another thing to note is that this packs another big punch because it's physical damage, and then it gets increased by this physical damage passive by 5%, which is amazing. So not only does this skill have a massive AoE dot, can proc implosion, gives us our major defense, also increases its damage by 5%. It also increases our weapon damage by 2% because just having it slotted. So this skill right here packs a massive punch in the DPS department and utility department. It's giving us so much out of this one skill. And that's why I really like Stam Sword. That's why we're going to use Hurricane on our front bar. Also, it has a 15-second timer, which is really nice. You want to have your 15-second timers, on your front bar. That way you have 10-second timers on the back bar. So you have a nice time window relation between the two, which is really, really cool. Our next ability is called Rending Slashes. Now, this has been indirectly nerfed due to the meta swing, and so we're going more towards building pin within our kit, like we talked about in the gear section. But that doesn't mean this is a bad skill, because it still can get empowered by the Maelstrom daggers, and it still does a lot of damage. Regardless of what penetration buffs we have up or not, because it ignores armor altogether because it's a bleed. So it's very, very effective there, and it's really cost efficient too, because it only costs 1,400 stam, which is nice. Deadly Cloak, pretty much mandatory in PvE for the simple fact that it gives us damage mitigation. Also, one thing to note about the dual wield abilities. Let's just go in here. It's kind of like, okay, so if we talked about implosion, right? This is kind of an execute. And if you think about it, a boss that has 89 million health, 15% of that is a good chunk of health and a time for this to be active. Now, what's cool about the dual wield abilities is that they too work in the same category. Stam Swords don't have an execute like Stamina Nightblades do. They're the only people that have Stamina Execute. But we do have some passive execute with Implosion and also with dual wield. So we increase our damage with dual wield abilities by 20% against enemies under 25% health. So again, because we have no execute, because we're doing the same thing no matter what, because we're using the Maelstrom daggers, we pack a massive punch. We get a huge increase in damage. when we hit 25%. Our Rending Slashes goes up. Our Deadly Cloak goes up. Our Rapid Strikes goes up. Our Rend goes up. So 20% extra damage under 25% health on a massive health boss, that's a lot of time to where we are just from 25% down to 15 is dual wield, just bumping our damage up. Then from 15 down to 0, we have dual wield plus implosion, and we're just going super hard. So the longer the fight, the stronger we get, okay? And especially when you get more Rend procs during that execute, which is really, really important. Because they pair with the Maelstrom daggers, they're getting like 2,000 extra weapon damage here. We have a lot of penetration, so they're doing near to true damage, so to speak. And then we have just a massive tooltip. And then we have the extra damage boost right here. That's why dual wield is so strong. Super strong here, especially on the Stamp Sword. Because we also have, remember, this does physical damage. So it has a 5% boost from being a Sorc. And so that's really part of, we're just using a lot of physical damage abilities that can proc implosion because it does physical damage. And on top of that, it's part of the dual wield tree, which is, has kind of like a little executes there. So I just really like how well this works together. That's what I'm saying. As our spammable, again, if we're using the Maelstrom daggers, we use Rapid Strikes, then a dot, Rapid Strikes, then a dot, and so forth. Although you'll see in the DPS rotation part, we do Rapid Strikes and some heavy attacks because we have that time window to where we can kind of catch up on anything we need to catch up on. You don't even have to do Rapid Strike. If you're way behind on stam management, then you just keep doing some heavy attacks. And they do 20% more damage under 25% health. So it's not bad to do heavy attacks. It's very useful, but once you get the timing down, you'll know when to use them. The other thing to note is dual daggers. Dual daggers will give us 10% crit, which is really, really, really good. That's why we're using them in this meta, because we have a ton of pen and we want a ton of crit, because our crit hit damage is coming massively from the CP, Trap, and Warhorn. So that's pretty cool. Plus, daggers, axe, that's the only thing that dual wood comes in for Maelstrom. Another thing to note, not necessarily super critical, but you get another 15% damage bonus when attacking stunned, immobilized, disoriented, or silenced enemies. So what used to happen is people would just use negates as stam sorcs, and they would actually get such a big damage bonus from the negate for everyone. Everyone that was using dual wield as your main, like spammable and stuff like that, would get 15% extra damage, which is really cool. And so yeah, this is kind of the front bar here. We have bound armaments here as well. Oh, this is another skill that packs a massive punch in the DPS department. Not only does it grant us our minor resolve, increasing our physical damage by 1,320, but it gives us 8% max stamina. Now pair that up with the Redguard passive, you're looking at some big numbers. Although we will be using a different set of food, it's still very, very effective. Along with 11% extra damage to heavy attacks. I mean, come on. We're so well rounded right now. It's really, really awesome. Now, here's the things too. Again, we get 2% for having it slotted. So on our front bar, we're getting an extra 4%. Another thing to note is that in the Daedric Summoning, we get 20% stamina recovery for having this slotted, which is very important for this patch. Very important. Another thing to note is that sorcerers have a lot of cost reduction in Magicka stamina abilities, along with ultimate abilities. And so that really helps us out. Now, we don't have a skill that generates us ult. So that's why this kind of balances out with the other classes in terms of, having ults all the time and stuff like that. But the 15% all the time, no matter what, don't have to do anything passive is really, really nice. Alright, let's flip to the back bar here. So this is our bow bar. This is kind of like our dot bar, our heavy dots. Again, the Maelstrom daggers can empower two of the dots on our back bar. Poison injection being one of them. Okay, so we talked about implosion being like a passive execute at 15. Then we have dual wield being another passive execute at 25. And then we have poison injection being another passive execute at 50%. So we have these little points, if we think about it, from 89 million health. I'm just using this as an example. Boss fight. That once we get down to 50%, we start executing with poison injection. Once we get down to 25, we start executing with dual wield. Once we get down to 15, we're executing with implosion, and then everything is just, piling up over time. That's why you'll see in some of these parses where people are doing the 3 million health damage parse. That doesn't really show the strength comparison between every class, because like DKs that have really high ult cost, 250 ult standard, right? And they get a big damage boost from that. Nightblades, they're so bursty, so the 3 million health is better for them to parse on in terms of damage numbers because it's shorter and they're very good at that small window. Stamina sorcerers, they're much better at a longer fight. So it really goes, it's hard to compare them, but just knowing the strengths of each class and like how the passes work, understanding that Stamina Sorcerer benefits from such a longer fight in terms of execute abilities. Now, obviously, everyone has Poison Injection and Rapid Strikes, Dual Wield to their advantage, but right now the Stamina Sorcerer is in the VMA department, which may be one of the only ones in that department in terms of using those daggers. I think for the most part, DKs and Sorks were always kind of the thing for the VMA daggers, but in this meta, it may just be only sorcerers, and we benefit heavily from Rend. Not only does it do a lot of damage over time, it also heals us, which is very important. So that's another thing that I really like about the sorcerer. Also, one thing to note on your back bar, Caltrops, again, I always say this, is a very expensive cost ability. Now, we do get, I think it's about 3,000 on all the other classes. And because of this passive right here, it knocks it down a little bit to 2,800. So it's not as bad, but if you are having problems sustaining, I highly suggest removing this skill, because if you take a look, every 12 seconds you're going to have to throw this. And it does do a lot of damage, and it does a lot of implosion and procs. But you will see a greater benefit if you stay alive and you have stamina to do damage, if you just want to slot crit surge right here. Because this will give you a lot of survivability. Also, it allows you to maybe not use the weapon power pots. Maybe you can use the less expensive pots, etc., because it gives you the buff. Just know that you need the major savagery from the potions. But it does give you a lot of benefit in terms of healing yourself due to, in crucial times, that maybe the healer might be rezzing somebody, or just didn't notice that you were taking a lot of damage at that point, or maybe you're just a little bit out of the heals. This will cover that area. It's not going to 100% save your life all the time, but it does help. If you're struggling with stamina, I highly suggest that, because this is a big contributor to why you will have stam problems. Because it's every 12 seconds. I mean, it's huge. It's another 500 cost on Hail, and they almost share the same duration. Trap is another big. They all cost a lot, but I will promise you this costs the most. Just a little side note there. Hail, again, very, very, very strong. Attacks on a 0.5. It's extremely strong with a Maelstrom bow. Trap here, again, we're empowering it. Although I got a nerf in terms of damage from this ability, it still provides us with minor force, and it still can be empowered, so it's very, very good. Caltrops, another big juicy one. So if you notice, everything on our kit, except for poison injection, is doing physical damage. Everything. So we're getting big boost to our damage. We're getting a lot of efficiency out of Energized passive, and we're getting a lot of efficiency out of Implosion. The longer the fight, the better we have a chance of doing here with Implosion. dual wield, execute, poison injection, execute. You guys can tell I love this. I love it. I love the kit here. So this is kind of how the passives are. I will say that this is very important passive, alchemy passive. When you use a potion, the resulting effect lasts 30% longer. So if you look at this, it's a 47.6 second cooldown on my potions. I believe I can use them. So if you look, a timer starts at 44 seconds. So basically, I can always have this buff up if I have 3 points in this passive, which is very important because that's where we're getting the potions right here is where we're getting our buffs from, our major crit and our major weapon damage, along with stamina back. So we're having faster returns on our stamina. We're getting major endurance from the potions, and so we're keeping up a lot of buffs while having this passive. It's very easy to get the alchemy passive going. You just need to crunch out, go look up a guide. Outcast has a great one where you just keep punching out the waters and the alchemy, just random alchemy mats, just making any potion you can, and then putting points in here, leveling at every 10 levels, put a point in here, and then switch your water, and then put some. You can respec like I did. You see 1 out of 8. I don't need this anymore. I just need these passives. So this is very important. I wanted to touch on this as well. I am a red guard, and so what red guards get, and I highly suggest, and especially in this patch, is being a red guard. Although, if you're not a red guard, say you're a wood elf, you'll have better regen. If you're a Khajiit, you'll have more crit, you'll have more damage, but you might have to do more heavy attacks and so forth. And Orc has more flat melee damage on top of more health, so you can take points out of health and put them in stam, etc. So everything has their little benefits here, but I believe that Red Guard is the best because you get 9% stamina recovery, which is great because we're using, regen food now. We have 10% max stam, which is great, pairs with our bound armaments. And then we have, when we deal direct damage, and we're melee, when we do melee attacks, we restore 798 stam. So this is also very good. So this is another stamina, sustained passive. Although it did get nerfed, it's still very, very effective. In terms of passives, obviously you need your Undaunted here. We run 7 medium, so we don't get a huge bonus from this, where 2% is better than nothing. Also, taking synergies. Don't be afraid to take synergy. You're going to need the Shard or the Orb synergy for the big, 4K boost to your stam, but it also gives you back 1,334 stam. So it's important to click even conduit synergies and other synergies that may appear, like the standard synergy and so forth. So it's very, very nice. Also, another thing to note, it's very important to have the Slayer passive because you get 3% while slotted. So on your back bar, you'll get an extra 6% damage, you see here, for having Dawnbreaker and Ramming Trap. You get 9 ultimate when you kill Undead, Daedra, or Werewolf, which isn't very important. Those are in the trials. This one right here. Your Fighter's Guild abilities will deal an additional 20% damage to Undead, Daedra, or Werewolves, right? So it's another one. So say you're doing Veteran Dragonstar Arena, because this build can be used in there too. You just need to tweak it just a bit. These 2 passives are very important. Oh, this is the one I wanted to touch on. Reduces stamina cost of your Fighter's Guild abilities by 15%, which is super important for Trap. And so it'll reflect that very much. Now, this doesn't affect the ult, I don't believe. No, just stamina cost. Okay. So there's a couple passives. Obviously, you want all your medium armor ones, all your dual wield armor passives, all your bow ones. Bows are important because we'll be on that back bar. And I think there's one here for crits. Costs, crit. Yep. This one doesn't really affect us. This one is very important. So when you do your light attacks on your back bar, you're actually increasing these two damage caps by 5% for 5 seconds. 5 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. So you do a light attack, that's at 5%. You do ramming trap light attack, hail light attack, injection light attack, caltrops light attack, and then swap bar. You're increasing your damage by 5% for each light attack. Only for 5 seconds. Now it's not super crazy important because it's only affecting 2 of your skills. And I do like to get back to my front bar because we have the daggers on the front. But it actually adds up to a lot of damage because hail is your #1 DPS source for single target and AoE. So it is nice to just do the light attacks when you can. Now, just remember you want to get back to your front bar for the extra crit and extra damage on your front bar. So guys, that was the skills and passives. We're going to move over to the character sheet in terms and talk about all that is involved over there. Let's check it out. Okay, so we're taking a look at stat sheets now, and the first thing you're going to notice is 19 points in health. So why is that? Okay, for stamina, we don't have anything that I like to call fake health. We don't have any of it. We don't have shields. So we need to protect ourselves with a little bit more health than you would on a Magicka build, right? So we put 19 points in health because we're using the Dubious Food. The Dubious Food is allowing us to be able to sustain this patch with the changes. It's going to give us a nice recovery bonus, but we do lose out on max stam and max health compared to the max health, max stam food. So we need to put some points into health to kind of bring that back up. So another important thing would be Eben here for us, along with Warhorn is going to give us a lot of health. And you just need to be able to understand when you're going to take damage, when you can avoid damage, and just communicating that with your healer, in a positive way, that to letting them know, hey, I'm a stand boy, don't have shields, I'm going to be taking this much damage here at this point, and if you could heal me, then I can survive the overlap damage. Or if you understand that your tanks are using Igneous Shield to recharge their stam, they're basically taking Magicka and converting it into stamina, then you should definitely put yourself in a position to where you can grab that shield. Depending on what meta they're using, the shield could be somewhere around 8k to 12k, depending. And so that's really, really important to know and to communicate with your team that you need this help. And on certain points, the tanks can even guard you. Even though you have the minor force from the trap, it is actually important to guard a stand build just for this. If you're going for score, if you're going for survivability and score and stuff like that. So it's actually very nice. So yeah, we have 17k health, 33k stam. Stamina recovery is at like 1,400 with the Dubious Food, which is really nice. It gets bonuses to, we talked about bound armaments regen, being a red guard, and so forth. Our weapon damage looks a little low, and our crit looks a little low, but that's because I've taken a potion. So we got about 3,387 weapon damage, not to mention the 2,000 from Maelstrom daggers empowering our dots, which is important. Almost around 80% crit, so if you have a Nightblade in your group, I think they give 2 or 3% crit, so you'll be around 80, 81. And our regen is pumped up because of the potion. So another thing to note, remember we talked about Hurricane. Going to give us our big buffs here. So we're in medium and we're sitting around 1,600, 1,700. These are very good. These are decent resistance. I wouldn't say very good. These are decent for being in all medium. Also, one thing to note I didn't touch on, if your group does not have Alkosh or not running the powerful, Power of the Light or poisons, and you just don't know your uptimes on your debuffs, I'm not sure if I mentioned this or not, it's good to go double sharpened here, because if you see, we have 4,500 pen from just crag and 1 sharpened alone. So it's actually very important to understand how much group penetration you do have, and then build accordingly to that. I just wanted to say that as well. We're using the Thief Mundus here. It's pretty much what every DPS is going to be using. Because you can only get crit from your gear, and that's it. So we need more crit in our gear, so we're going to use the Thief. And we're going to rely on the champion points to give us the crit hit damage that we need. So we went over the food, the Mundus, the attributes, the stamina regen. It's very important, and how it gets amped with the Sorc passives and the potion buff. Our weapon damage are critical, and how understanding that even though 3,383 max weapon damage looks low, you're going to be getting Spellfire Cure. Your dots are going to be getting an extra 2,000 weapon damage, which is awesome. And our resistances, though they may look low, are actually pretty good for a stamina user. And then we'll get combat prayer, and we'll be around. We'll be close to 20k physical, but spell resistance is the most important part. Well, guys, this was the character sheet, and kind of like going over, making sure I don't forget the Mundus part. But this is something that you can compare yourself to. Understand that I have all gold gear except for this, so we will have a little bit more crit once we get divines and we get gold. So your crit may be higher or lower depending on, you know, if it's gold or divines. So just make sure, you know, not to get too crazy about how my stats will match your stats. Just understand that these are the goals you want to get to. Max health, you know, stamina may be lower or higher depending on race. Stamina recovery, same thing. Weapon critical, same thing. If you're Khajiit, if not, it should be close to mine. Weapon damage and so forth. So hope you like this, guys. We're going to move over to the champion points and take a look at that and how I went over those in terms of the stamina sorcerer, because they're a little different. So now we're going to take a look at the champion points. We'll start with the blue tree because that's the most popular. So here we take a look at, you see right away that we have a ton into Thaumaturge. If you notice that all of our damage is basically, it's all dots, all of it. And so that means we're going to need a lot of dot damage. I will say that Implosion is a nice, you know, boost of damage, but in terms of all of our damage from 100 to 0, we're mainly dots. And so that's why we have 81 into Thaumaturge. To really boost all of our dot damage. So we have 64 here in a Mighty to get 13%, 52 here for crit hit damage, which is really nice. 5 in Master at Arms because we do have a couple initial hits and light attacks and stuff like that, but we don't have a ton of direct damage, so to speak. We have a lot of damage over time ability, so that's why you see such a big swing between the two. We have Physical Weapon Expert here for light attacks, heavy attacks, and so forth. So these kind of combine together. 2% and 5% combined together for the light attacks and heavy attacks. And then this just covers all of the first initial hits, which is a nice little boost here for 5 points. Moving on to the red tree, we have 52 here in Ironclad. All the damage that's kind of direct towards us will be mitigated, which is really nice. This was not in the last patch, but it is in this patch. It's very nice. Big boost to, you know, our defenses as a melee. 22 in Spell Shield. We're gonna usually what we get hit by, right, is AoEs and big, like, it's always going to be, it's not always, but it usually is magic damage. because physical damage is very unique. It's like the what is this thing's called? The tears or the things on SO when he shoots them out of his hand. I can't remember what they're exactly called. The tears? I don't know, but they come out of his hand. They do, you know, poison or damage or whatever. So that is an instance. Also in Halls, there's kind of like a little poison injection thing from the first boss ads and stuff like that. But those are usually dots. Now the tears aren't dots, but we're gonna be okay in that regard because it's mainly spell damage stuff, you know, magic damage stuff. Also the poison in SO, but the poison in SO is mitigated by thick skin because it's a dot. So there's a lot of things that we can cover in terms of physical damage that is damage over time. So we're kind of covered there, but our defense for physical damage is a little low because we have higher physical damage, and mainly it's mostly magic stuff that hits you. That's why we have 64 in Ellie defender and 22 in a spell shield. Also, if it's direct damage, we're covered here as well. So we have a couple things just kind of covering us. So Ironclad covers, you know, doesn't matter what kind of damage it is as long as it's direct. And then we have thick skin as long as it's dot. So we're covered in that regard, but we just have a little bit less in the hardy, so we can bump up that spell shield here. We have 52 in the Warlord because we do need to break free. There are stuns in VMAL and some instances in AA and maybe Hell Raw where you get uppercutted, or an AA, I think. No, I don't think so in AA. I take that back. But, you know, VMAL, you do have to break on the last boss. In Halls of Fabrication, lots of break freeing and stuff like that. So, 74 here, or 76 here for the stamina recovery. 64 in tenacity because we are going to be doing a couple of heavy attacks in our rotations to kind of keep our stamina juice really good, especially in those long fights. And if we need to break free, it's going to take some stam out. So this is actually very important here. And 18 into roll dodging because sometimes, you know, we do need to roll dodge, get out quick. Although that's not our main defense, but it is very nice to have. So we'll be doing some of that. Nothing in here, and we're back around. So guys, that was the champion points. If you have any questions about this, then please leave it below. We're going to go ahead and move on to the DPS rotations and add-ons and so forth. Alrighty, we're here with the DPS rotations and kind of add-ons and how I really set up my add-ons and maybe some key important ones and my thought process behind how I go about just doing a rotation, fixed and non-fixed rotations and stuff like that, and how I utilize the add-ons to help me with do that. So the first add-on I want to talk about is combat metrics. So with combat metrics, it's going to allow us to do a lot of things, important things. It's going to tell us our uptimes on our buffs, so we know that we need to improve there, or we're doing good in a certain area. Damage statistics for certain skills, damage statistics versus certain targets, and so forth. So we're going to take a look at that right now. I just smacked the dummy guy a couple times, and it just happened to be that Rending Slash's bleed did the most damage. And my uptime for, you know, Two Fang Snake was this, and so forth. So it's going to tell us a lot of information. Now, how I utilize this is very important. So when you're setting up your champion points, you want to know how much damage everything is doing. So you're going to take out, for stamina, you're going to take out all your blue CP, right? And just confirm it. And then you're going to do like a 3 million health test dummy or 6 million health with help from a friend of sustaining, because the fight's going to be much longer because you have no CP and your damage. And then you're going to see that, you know, what did the most damage when I have no CP, nothing's boosting it, and just my gear, and how well I'm performing on the dummy. And then you're going to look through here, how much of it was dots, how much of it was direct damage, you know, how much is physical, how much is affected by penetration. So rending slash is not affected by pen. So I got to take all these things into account. I know it's a lot to take in, but it's very useful information. That's what combat metrics allows you to do. It allows you to tell you, you know, the percent of damage that you did in your group, how much you did, overall damage that your group did, etc. And then in here, in this window, there will be multiple targets. You know, if there's multiple adds, and how much DPS you did to them. You know, say you want to check the damage between Hurricane and Blade Cloak for AoE, you can kind of go down the mobs and see, you know, Hurricane's doing some work. You know, how many implosion procs did I get on this guy, etc. So you can see all of that information with combat metrics, so that's very important. Another one that's really good is Surrender. You'll notice when I use skills, they appear on my left. It's a bug right now. The major ward of major resolve is I've already canceled blacklisted it so it wouldn't show, but for damaging ability skills that proc a armor buff or something, they always show. So basically what you want right here is you want your damage over time, your dots and stuff like that right here, and then like your ground dots and everything. So you have everything right here. So I don't need to know that Rearming Trap is ready for another minute, right? So what I can do here is I can go to Addons, Surrender, and blacklist Rearming Trap. Sorry. Oops. So if I do this, it should show. Okay, maybe it didn't. Let's see, what's that buff exactly? So what you can do, you see here, I type Rearming Trap. It has to be exactly like it, and then you can put the brackets 42747. So you say that in Say Chat, you go over here, Add-ons, I pull the Say Chat out, and I think you can just put in 427, yeah, 47, and that's unique to that buff. So Rearming Trap has, you know, has been added to the blacklist and no longer will display. So now I put down Trap and it's bugged, so it's still displaying. Anyway, so let's just check it with the potions, right? Major Brutality. Let's just say we don't want to see that anymore. I don't need to know that my potions are active. Let's just go Major Brutality. Major Brutality is added. Let's do them all. Major Endurance. Added. And then what was the other one? Savage. Okay, because I don't need to know that I'm getting those buffs from my potions. I already know. Right? So we just added all three of those. Hopefully it's not bugged and it'll stop. We're going to wait for a potion. Take a potion and it's no longer. So that's how it's supposed to work. Sometimes bugs out and doesn't work correctly with certain skills like this, or Major Ward, Major Resolve, but for the most part it works. Let's see. I think we can cut down on. Yeah, I don't need to know my major buffs. It still shows them. Another thing to note is that Poison Injection and Rending Slashes won't be displayed because they're not a buff or a ground dot. So the way to track those would be your target's debuffs. So when I'm look away, I'm not looking at a target. When I look back at boss, it shows Rending Slashes because that's on him. So all the debuffs on your target will need to be. It's kind of a tedious process, but you'll have to go through and blacklist all the debuffs on the target that you don't want to see. So like major fracture, minor fracture, all that stuff. So you can do that there. So that's Surrender. It's basically doing all my dots here. Another important one is if you're using Crit Surge, to know when Crit Surge is down or up. So the buff I use for this is buff timers. I really like buff timers for just kind of certain things that I want to know information wise, and I can put them right here and it does a nice big countdown. So it's called buff timers here. You can have up to 15 buffs. They have their own image right here, and you just type in the name and it does it automatically. I have it set to not always show, so as soon as the duration's out, it's gone, right? Because I don't always use crit surge, but when I do, it'll tell me, right? And if I don't see it and I'm using it, I know it's down, so I just got to reapply it. So that's kind of like the add-ons that I use. I use FTC for health bars only. Just always have, so I just kind of stuck with those. So those are kind of the add-ons. Let's take a look at... So the thought process behind a DPS rotation, right? Single target. You want to do the most damage to one target. That way it reduces the time that you're in that fight. So depending on mechanics, you'll want to DPS the main guy as much as you can. So the way I start off all the bosses fights, especially on most all my stamina classes, is I start off on my back bar because it has the most skills here that can be applied to the boss and need to be applied to the boss because they're pretty important. Rearming trap. If you take a look at the actual trap, you see that it takes time to set and open up. It actually says that right here as well. It takes 1.5 seconds to arm. Endless Hell doesn't say this, but if you notice, if I shoot the hell, right, it actually doesn't hit the ground for a while, right? So taking these two things into account, I can start my DPS rotation with this and trap, and then they hit this target around the same time. So that's how I start off. Then I'll do a light attack injection, light attack caltrops, and swap. But that's how I start. Now, before the fight, you can do two things: Hurricane and Deadly Cloak. And if you notice, they both have 15 seconds, and Hell has 10 seconds. So these kind of all come together very nicely. So before the fight, you can do Deadly Cloak and Hurricane. So you're getting your big buffs here and your damage mitigation here. Now, another thing to note for Deadly Cloak, which is very important, is that it attacks every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. So no matter where it is in its duration, you can always reapply Deadly Cloak, and it'll always attack every 3 seconds. So if you notice here, as soon as I apply it, it should hit right here. Then 3 seconds pass by, hits again. Seconds pass by, hits again, right? But if I just sit here and spam it, it's not going to attack until 3 seconds has gone by. So if you take that into account, you can reapply Deadly Cloak before you need to go to your back bar. That way it's always up. And the only downside to that is that you lose stamina per cast because you're casting it more than the actual duration, but you gain the benefit of having it up while on your back bar and not having to worry about this as an actual timer. So what I do is I'll put out all my ground dots, or I'll buff up, right? And I'll start with trap, hail, injection, caltrops, this, swap, right? Now I'm on my front bar. If I don't even do anything else, you see that Deadly Cloak needs to be reapplied, and then hail and Hurricane have the same duration. They're almost on the same time. You see that? Okay, I'll do it again. I'll only do Hell this time. So if you see, Hell is on the same timer that Hurricane is. And I need to reapply all 3 of those skills before I need to reapply, I'm sorry, Deadly Cloak and Hurricane before I go to my back bar. Right? But because we know that Deadly Cloak can be reapplied before its duration ends and you don't lose any effectiveness out of it other than more stam drain, that I can just go ahead and reapply it. So these 3 big skills are on the same timer. So I'm just doing my DPS right here, down to 4 seconds. I'll do Deadly Cloak again, then I'll do a Rapid Strikes, Hurricane swap, Ramming Trap, Hail, Injection. And then you notice Hail and Hurricane are on the same timer yet again. It's because Hurricane is 15 seconds and Hail is 10. So it's going to take me time after I cast this to do her, trap, then Hail, and then Injection. And then, they share the same timer. So they're near the same. So when you want to swap bars is when you know Hurricane. I just keep an eye out for Hurricane now, because Hurricane does 150% more damage the last tick, so it's actually very important. So if we do that, then we just buff up, right? Come do our guy. We're just doing our DPS on our front bar, blah blah blah. Do Deadly Cloak, and then I plan a Rapid Strikes. You see Hurricane flop, and boom, just like that. That's how I always do mine on the sword, because of Hurricane and how it relates to Endless Hell. So I hope that helps you out, guys, in understanding why I do this rotation, because these are my, these two things line up very perfectly. You'll have a little bit of downtime on Hill if you wait to the last second of Hurricane, but that's okay, because we're getting a big damage proc at the end of Hurricane. So, and don't be afraid to redo Hurricane, before the 1 second. That's also fine as well. Yeah, so that's how I kind of understand how I do my rotation. Now, I don't really have a fixed rotation other than how I start the fight. So I showed you guys how I start the fight. I buff up, right? Take a pot, and I come in here, do trap. Or you can come in here, or you can buff up, right? Do hail, then trap. Doesn't matter. Then you swap to your front part. Then I would do Rapid Strikes, Rend, because it's a big damage ability. Then Rapid Strikes, Rending Slashes. Then I would do Heavy Attack, Deadly Cloak, Heavy Attack, Rapid Strikes, and then do Hurricane swap and start all over. You need to do a Rapid Strikes before you do your Hurricane swap. That way you can empower Trap and Injection. Another thing to note is that if you see the Hurricane animation, right? It's like pretty long. I mean, it's not super long, but it's like he's he's going down, doing a squat, and he's coming up, and he's powering up, right? Because it's Hurricane. So you see that right there. Now watch when I just click in swap. Right. Very quick, which allows me to do the Rapid Strikes and then have the time for within 4 seconds to cast 2 power-empowered dots, which would be Trap and Hurricane, or Trap and Injection, sorry. So I will do a Rapid Strikes, swap. You see how it just cut out the entirety of everything, and it just straight up went to the back part. So I do Rapid Strikes, Hurricane swap, Trap, Light Attack Injection. Just like that. Easy peasy, guys. Rapid Strike, Hurricane swap, Trap, Hail, Injection. Just like that. And you want to try and get light attacks between everything. If you don't, then that's just something to work forward to. It's not like a massive deal, especially on the Sam Sword, but it is nice to try and get those light attacks between. So, light attack here. Just like that. If you don't do, you saw it kind of was a little wonky because I did a light attack. If you do Rapid Strikes, push Hurricane swap, it's much more fluid. So you can kind of pick and choose where you do your light attacks, but just know that they are important to your DPS and constantly gaining ult. So after you do your back bar rotation, you always want to come front, do Rapid Strikes, and then a Rend. That way you let Rend have the time to build up. And it's out right at the beginning. Boom, it's going, right? So that's that. So just going over little tips and tricks here, and then this is my total. Let's just build some ult, and I'll show you my exact rotation, even though it's kind of hard to see with Hurricane. So I'll just DPS this guy down, not using potions. Just gonna do a couple rotations here. Come on, ult. I mean, Rend is pretty cheap for as much damage as it's doing. It's freaking cheap. Okay, so this is the boss fight, right? Gonna do Deadly Cloak, Hurricane, go in there. Rapid Strikes, Rend. Rapid Strikes, Rending Slashes. And this is the time I have downtime, right? I can do Heavy Attack from this, and a Heavy Attack. Just like this, guys. I have some time, do a Heavy Attack. Just like this. Same thing, I'm just reapplying. And heavy attacks between things if you need to get your stamina back. Obviously I'm not using potion, but just like this. Same thing over and over. The only difference is once that's kind of like a nice fixed rotation. The only difference will be is when the boss does a mechanic or moves, and that's when the add-ons come to high effect, right? They're telling me exactly what is going to be up or down, and then I use that accordingly. I say, yep, I know that even though my hail may be up, but the boss moves, and I need to reapply that because it's my #1 damage skill. So the add-ons are telling me the duration of my skills, and then I take that information and plan accordingly of what my next action will be. So I hope that helps you guys in terms of starting off with a practice rotation, understanding the tips and tricks, and then understanding that it's not always going to be a fixed rotation because the boss moves and does whatever. So guys, that was the add-on part. Oh, I almost forgot. Okay, this is a special treat if you made it to this part of the video. A lot of people say, yeah, it's great, you know, you got your single target damage, you know, down, you showed us all that, but what about trash? You know, we lack you know, AoE like Magicka, and that's when this build really comes into effect and uniqueness because we're swapping it up. So this is our single target setup right here that I showed you guys, and then this is our AoE setup. Now this might be harder to get for most people, that's why I'm not going to put it in like the must-have be-all, but for AoE purposes, this is exactly what I do, right? I'm a support role in AoE trash fights, okay? What I do is, for example, on VMAL, there's things called Sun Eaters, and they throw down negates and they start raping everyone. You know, they just start taking out their health. They negate their ability to run Magicka skills, and it's just not a good time. Also, it can negate Destro or any like ground dot. So like, say you had a Nova there or whatnot, and then boom, it's gone, right? So it's important to focus targets down. And so if you're focusing a target down, you'll want to use Rapid Strikes here instead of Steel Tornado. But for sake of just AoE, we're gonna have Steel Tornado. Now you see my daggers have changed, my 2-piece has changed, and my setup has changed. So for AoE for the Stam Sword, I run 2 Storm Fist, 5 Alkosh, so 2 daggers, 3 jewelry, and then 2 Fang Connect. So what I'm doing is I'm going to the targets that are priority, right? I'm going to drop all my ground dots out. I'm going to drop a bow ult, and then I'm either going to go in here and just AoE around, or I'm going to use Rapid Strikes and focus those targets, okay? And then I'm going to take a synergy for my Alkosh on my front bar and debuff that add immediately. That means the tank doesn't have to come over here and do it. That means the tank doesn't actually have to run that on trash if everything's stacked up. And it also gives me a big boost and damage over time for 10 seconds on AoE. And Alkosh is a nice AoE dot. So what that will do is bring my DPS up to at least something comparable, right? And I'll be debuffing and supporting. Now, if there isn't a target that you need to focus down, then don't use the bow ultimate. What you're going to do is you're going to use Aggressive Warhorn. So we're gonna, obviously you want it max level, but we're gonna use Warhorn for that extra crit hit damage. If you're in a group that is going for score or just trying to make things easier, you know, you'll have the tank do a Warhorn, you have another tank do a Warhorn. Healers are kind of iffy now. Healers can run other things like Resto ulti with the Master Architect, or maybe they're a Warden and they use the Trio or the Nova for certain things. Having this ability to have a stand player single target down something really quickly in 5.2 seconds for the same amount of damage as the tooltip Rend. We're talking burst, things that need to die fast, right? Bowl to me is where it is. That's burst. But if it's like, if nothing needs to be, you know, if nothing important needs to be extremely bursted and everything needs to die at roughly the same time, then you're going to use Warhorn on your back bar and help out that Warhorn rotation so that you have the major force uptime, everyone, for a higher uptime on it, right? In trash fights. So you'll have aggressive Warhorn on your back bar. And then you have Smiting Dawnbreaker if you need it. Use on the front bar. Boom. Boom. Smacks him with 13k and a 17k dot. AoE. So that's how I set up here, guys. I have my major defenses here. I have Crit Surge for extra healing because I'm going to need it. I don't have a shield, and so that's going to help out the healers. And then the back bar pretty much stays the same because it's nice, big AoE, juicy stats, and a single target execute. So I hope that kind of helps. Also, Stormfist is big time AoE damage here. See this fist that comes out. It also can proc Implosion. And it just procs on all damage, right? Actually, this is oh my god, I fucked up his name. This is Shadzilla's house, and he has a nice little dummy thing over here. Let's do it over here on the AoEs. Another fellow Stam guy here. Alright, so you notice that Stormfist is hitting a lot of them. Also, we don't have any shards or any synergies, but this is a pretty good example of we can do decent, consistent damage here. Although sustain is a little rough with the NATO here, so that's why most of the time I just run rapid strikes and I'll single target them down. But as you can see, you know, even without the Alkosh proc and stuff like that, we're around 50,000 AoE damage, which is pretty good, you know, for being able to do that consistently. And then on top of that, we have, you know, the utility of Warhorn or Bow Ultimate to nuke down a target. And then we have a couple things that do a lot of AoE damage, like Stormfist, stuff like that. Also, Stormfist has a nice one piece for stat regen. But if we had Alkosh on these guys, you know, that would be a big boost of AoE damage in terms of dots. And we have a huge, you know, lot of points in the Thaumaturge. So that's kind of like my AoE setup, guys. Normally I should probably do more AoE setups for all my builds. But I know you guys know I know Stamp Sword. That's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys. That this is exactly what I run. I run a support build for trash, whether it be burst support or Warhorn support, etc. But the gear remains the same, as much AoE as possible. It does help that things are stacked and stuff like that, so that the Stormfist hits everything, Alkosh hits everything. So the better the stack, the more DPS you'll get, but for AoE at least. But yeah, guys, let's move on to the DPS parse part of it. I know all you guys are watering out the mouth for that, so we're gonna put that in the video as well. And then I hope to see you in the next build video, guys. Have a good day.